Chapter 4. Part 3. Nasmarina, seeing the retreat of the central line, ordered the cavalry to retreat, forcing his adversaries to follow it into the battlefield. His riders were positioned behind the central line of the League. Adrian's legion advanced in order towards the hill. The mercenaries of Almera faced each other and the Magans used their elemental spells against the defenders of the hill. They were simple fire or earth spells since when using weapons they could not learn the most powerful spells, but they caused damage in the enemy positions. Faced with this unexpected action, Kush had to use his famous Fire Dragon spell to disorder the Magans who had to escape from the flames of fire so as not to be burned to death, but they lost the magician, since as always when he performed the spell he was unconscious. The other two mercenary mags could barely perform spells of protection against the Magans' attacks. Adrian as a good soldier ordered the mercenaries to attack from the south while his legion did so from the west side. This had to divide the forces of the defenders of the hill. They were divided into two groups. The first, commanded by Agnorok, Gosberg, Kritus and Sabu, faced the other attacking mercenaries, while Aris along with Deboek, his cousins, and Arian would face the Golden Lion Legion. The mercenaries of the Flaming Sword were the first to climb the side of the hill. They were greeted by a batch of daggers that caused many casualties, but this was an open battle, not an underground fight in a dark mine, and Gosberg, although it was lethal, was not applied with the same forcefulness. The one who did cause countless casualties was the great Denka. Sabu with his double-edged axe sowed terror among the assailants. Kritus hit with his bolts and Agnorok finished off those who nevertheless reached his position. At last he saw how an old acquaintance arrived to meet him. Almazados Quayabraquelos looked at him with bloodshot eyes. "In the end I will repay myself for what you did to me in Almera, you disgusting half-orc." Agnorok was not much of a fighter-talker. He would sometimes mumble something. He even had a hard time shouting orders if he focused too much on the fight. And he advanced on Almazados directly. The clash of the swords was thunderous, neither of them backed down, but here always lay Agnorok's advantage. He had an incredible ability to turn at the right moment, taking advantage of the opponent's inertia. A slight turn of the waist made Almazados bow slightly. And this was the difference of the half-orc. He was much more effective than before. Perhaps his blows were not as spectacular as a decade ago, but they were more lethal. He slashed the inside of the half-ogre's right knee and screamed inconsolably, putting his knee in the mud and lowering his sword. He had no mercy. After a second the head of the semi-ogre lay on the ground, separated from his body. Arisa couldn't believe it. Her best warrior had died in less than a minute. The mercenaries have a problem. Unlike the regular soldiers, they value their life much more, and when they saw that the casualties they suffered were too many, they began to retreat. While on the central front of the battle, the League was suffering an unmitigated defeat. They could not contain either the dwarfs or the hosts of Olbiana despite the harassment of the archers on the dwarven flank. On the other hand, the cavalry of the Alliance had realized their position of advantage and had attacked from the rear to the League line. But they seemed to expect that action and resisted the charge of the enemy cavalry. Even so, it was not a position they could hold for long. General Adrian from the center of his legion was savoring victory. Although it seemed that the mercenaries and the Magans were retreating, his legion was advancing mercilessly on the hill. Aris and Deboek could do nothing, as they barely resisted. The legionnaires were not the mercenaries of the sword. When one fell in the vanguard, another legionnaire replaced him. His advance was slow but unstoppable. The situation became desperate. Aris and his cousins were surrounded by mercenaries. If they fell, then Agnorok would fall. They would take the hill and the battle would be lost. As much as Silkai went to the aid of Aris and Loranthas, he went down with his battalion to help the central flank of the front. They were losing the battle. It was the moment that the priestess had agreed with Aris. Arian shook his head. He had no choice but to do so. Everything he had achieved these 10 years was in danger. He closed his eyes asking for forgiveness and then took the blue jewel, put it in his hands, and like that time in the Tower of Tripulia, his body shone completely blue. he rose a few meters above the ground to the amazement of whoever was next to him. Once he was high enough, he opened both eyes, which were a blue hue, and hurled a bolt of lightning at the legion. The explosion was heard throughout the battlefield, and caused that for an instant when the fighting stopped, General Adrian could not believe it. Half of his legion lay on the ground totally dismembered. But the League was not to make concessions, it was the agreed signal. Out of nowhere the terrible wolf riders of the Fambir forest came out on the right flank to attack the ill-fated legionaries. On the eastern front, hidden under ditches were the spearmen of Anthra, who came out of hiding to harass the right flank of the Garter. On the other hand, Nasmarina's cavalry had reorganized and charged the alliance cavalry that was now between the pikes of the Anthra lancers and the cavalry. Lorantha's troops continued their attack on the dwarven vanguard that was still under pressure from the archers. For the first time the alliance had to retreat, the legion was totally disorganized, the Fambir horsemen pierced them like butter and headed after sowing chaos to the rear of the alliance's center line.